Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, founder of Thrive Meetings and Events, and this podcast. Here on the Eating at a Meeting podcast, we talk to experts about all things food and beverage. We've got farmers and doctors and chefs and eaters. And today we have a disability diplomat. Her name is Donna Mack, and she brings a lifetime of disability customer experience that has resulted in more than 35 years of training, presenting, and consulting on disability access and inclusion, and has planned and hosted local, regional, and national events specific to the disability community. Please help me welcome Donna to the show. And she, in her own words, is always the last one chosen for Pictionary. I love that. And I welcome Donna.
Thanks. It's great to be here. Thanks, Tracy.
Thanks. Thanks for being here. My guests might wonder, disability diplomat, what does that have to do with food and beverage? Why don't you answer that question?
Well, okay. So I was born 2.5 months premature and was given a 2% chance to survive. And with that came issues with my vision. I was always considered legally blind, but but just barely over that limit. And I could read books and ride bikes, and I wanted to be an artist. And, I did all the things most kids could do until I was 12. And I think my vision loss for where things were scientifically, medically at that time, it was pretty much inevitable. And so Disability Diplomat, it kind of has to do with, it's my approach of feeling like I sort of have one foot in both worlds, in like an able-bodied sighted world and one foot in the world of disability. And so today, we're going to be talking about needs specific to the blind and visually impaired community and how to hopefully make us feel more welcome and comfortable eating at a meeting. And gosh, I love the name of your podcast. That's genius.
Oh, thank you. I actually have to give credit to a AV guy who was listening to me, and he goes, Tracy, you're all things eating at a meeting. And so wow. I have to give him credit. Well, and one, you and I are friends with Elisa Hayes. And so she and I have talked about mobility, disability as it relates to someone in a wheelchair coming up to a buffet or accessing that. And my first experience, which really wasn't experience, but my first story about the blind and visually impaired was an event that I was planning probably at least a decade ago in Austin, and the new Hyatt Regency was opening up, and my group was the third or fourth group coming in, and they had said that there was a group for the blind, visually impaired coming in before us. And someone on my team jokingly said, well, they don't have to have anything ready for them because they can't see it. But come to find out, they actually have to have things even more prepared for you so that you're not having to maneuver around construction or things like that, but even maneuvering the buffet. Can you explain a little bit about how that kind of really works in the real world?
In the real world, I would say that if you are planning a meeting for a group that is specifically blind or visually impaired, buffets are not blind friendly, period. They just aren't. I would say it doesn't mean we can't deal with them, but I'm saying if you're talking a group of 30, 50, 500, 1,000 people from the blind community, then that's just going to be really difficult to manage. I would suggest, when possible, in a situation like that, go with plated meals and past hors d'oeuvres. Of course, I don't know, with some of this, I don't know what food regulations are. We are in the pandemic right now, so I don't know what differences in food regulations will be. So, I would say past hors d'oeuvres or plated meals, a lot of finger foods, because you have people at all levels of eating etiquette in the blind and visually impaired community, because you have them at all different levels of vision loss,
right,
or visual acuity. And some people, especially people who have previously had sight, are very self-conscious about eating in public. And they think, okay, if it's a slider or a piece of pizza or chicken fingers, a veggie tray, something I can pick up and eat with my hands, it's going to be less awkward than having to negotiate with a knife and a fork. I personally, my mom was a drill instructor. I mean, not really, but kind of yes and no. I can remember being in the hospital when my vision was really deteriorating, and I had already lost the vision in one eye, and my good eye was patched. And she had decided that we were going to practice my eating skills, and blindness eating skills. And that day, the hospital happened to serve Cornish game hen, and she made me, use a knife and fork and try to eat it. And I think about, probably 45 minutes in, I just said, I'm ripping the legs off this thing, and if there's anything left on the breast, I'm just picking that up too. But now, I'm really grateful, because now I don't feel uncomfortable eating in public. And there are some things I would put on the don't serve, if you will, don't serve a blind audience, and those would be things like whole lobsters, or any kind of shellfish that's still in the shell will probably be a little bit difficult for a lot of people. No spaghetti, linguine, that type thing. No Jell-O. If you do want to serve a gelatin dessert, serve it in a ramekin, but I would shy away from it because it gets wiggly. And something else that I think is important is something that I think a lot of probably meeting planners don't think about is, okay, you have like a real thin broth-based soup, like maybe a French onion soup. That's going to be pretty thin, as opposed to a really hearty soup. Holding, whether it's a spoon or a bowl or a plate level, it requires vision. I can do it fairly well, but I know that if I have shallow dishes, especially, it's really hard for me to not spill a little of a liquid. So I would say keep that in mind with things that you serve if you're in a buffet line, or really anywhere. If you do have an audience of blind and visual, in an event with a lot of blind and visually impaired attendees, offer covered containers to transport liquids, especially hot liquids. A lot of us will probably have guide dogs. And number one, we don't want to spill it on ourselves, but we really don't want to spill like hot coffee on our dogs. That would be awful. Yeah. So, but as far as buffets, if you have to have a buffet, just some thought is you are going to, again, have people with different levels of vision. And so for people who are low vision, contrast is key.
Okay.
Try to avoid in any kind of dining situation with people with vision loss, avoid, like mood lighting and dimmer switches. Those are just horrible for us. Use tablecloths that contrast with the color of the dishes that you're using. So no white on white. Give us some contrast so that we can actually see where the dishes are placed. And that even goes for plates that you would pick up at a serving station, at a serving table. It's sometimes it's tough to find tongs or serving utensils in a buffet line. Sometimes that's difficult to locate because every once in a while somebody will leave them in the
right
in the chafing dish, But if you can have like a spoon rest of some sort, whether it's a small platter or a real spoon rest or a plate, maybe in front of the chafing dish, so that we can locate it and again have maybe a black or a red cloth against a white plate, or a white.
Really interesting. Even like thinking about going through the buffet and doing that, and this is crazy. It reminded me of a lunch plate years ago. I can't remember her name, but she had asked for a special plate for dietary needs, and we had white tablecloths. They gave it to her on a white plate, and everything on the food, everything they served her was white. So it was really,
wow.
I mean, she wasn't visually impaired, but she had dietary needs, but it was like white rice and potato. I mean, it was just really, we all at the table got a laugh out of it. But
wow,
going to the buffet line, that's pretty, that's a very different thing to think about. I don't think that we've really ever, nor has a hotel really thought about that when they're designing a buffet. They're just using their standard linens and, and putting it out. But everything is, so tightly knit as you go down through a buffet as well. And the spoons there, and you don't know if you've hit a regular chafing dish. Now, individuals who have dietary restrictions, strict ones, that, really, really need to have a separate plate created for them. Would you be opposed if there was a buffet to actually have a plate delivered to your table instead of having to walk through the buffet? Or would you want to be part of that buffet service?
I personally would probably want to be part of it. Unless my diet was just super, super restricted,
right.
But you know what? It's kind of a dilemma in a sense, because most people who are visually impaired, the other thing I was going to say is always have extra staff on hand, because we may need help. We will probably ask for help because of, the challenge of holding a plate level. Sometimes we may ask for help with that. And I mean, I don't have enough vision to feel confident serving myself in a buffet. I just don't. I mean, I can do that in my own home and I can do that in a friend's home, but not in a buffet. Plus, I mean, if you think about it, somebody's either going to have more than likely a cane or a dog, and they're trying to handle that and a serving utensil and a plate. And it's just, it's going to be a challenge. So if you can have extra staff, and if you can have extra staff who can kind of look at the buffet as a whole and say, okay, I'm going to tell you, we have, 3 entree choices because what I find is, it's like, I'll hear about the first entree choice, but I won't, and maybe I won't know about the second one. And the first one sounds pretty good, but what I didn't know is there are like 3 choices. And the third one is really what I might most want to have. And if we just go through one by one, it's hard to get a big picture. And the other thing is, to keep all like items together in a buffet. Like, I have been to buffets before where they do have multiple entree choices, and those are kind of spread out throughout the buffet. And it's like, I don't know. I think it's harder for us to, I don't know. I've talked to a couple of folks, because I tried to survey different individuals in the blind community, and they were saying, yeah, it's just a whole lot easier if you have like all the entrees together and all the salads together and that type thing. And speaking of salads, y'all need to know that the most artisanal salads are typically the hardest for us. There's very little difference in the weight the weight that is added to a fork. There's very little difference between the weight of just a little bite-sized piece of salad and like a leaf, a leaf that has dressing on it that, might cover a quarter of my face. And I'm not going to know the size of the thing until it touches my face. And I do tend to probably more than a lot of people use a knife on my salads if they're not chopped, but when in doubt, make it a chopped salad. Because I think of like a taco salad. I don't tend to think of those as having voluminous leaves. And
Right.
the other kind of salad that I feel like is tough. A wedge salad is a little bit difficult too, but those salads, and you guys probably have a technical name for them in the industry, but the ones where like all the cucumbers are together and all the carrots are together, but they're carrot sticks, and and all the broccoli florets are in the same place. And it's like, those can be a challenge. Salad dressing in a little, in a small container, kind of a little ramekin is nice on the side. Because sometimes it's difficult to tell how much you're pouring out of a container of salad dressing.
Wholeheartedly, even for someone who has vision, it's very hard, and sometimes it gets heavy. Now, do you, talking about having somebody at the buffet, and do you travel with an assistant or a seeing eye dog? How do you travel?
I personally have a guide dog. I travel independently, but I have a dog, but she's not going to be able to say, "Hey, Mom." They have salmon, and then they have beef tips and gravy, and she's not going to be able to.
Guide dogs to speak.
Sometimes you would think, but
Okay, so I'm going to jump to, so you're at an event and you've got your guide dog with you. What's the protocol for her or him?
The protocol for her is, a couple of things. If you're staff, please try not to interact with the dog, because when you do that, that's like somebody trying to tap you on the shoulder and keep asking you questions when you're trying to cross an intersection in your car, or better yet, an interstate in your car. Mm-hmm. So that can be a distraction. No human food. It's not, if you actually see a guide dog, if you know that that's a guide dog, you can't ask. It's not legal to ask to see a license. The person must maintain control of their animal, or they can be asked to leave an establishment. So they need to, the dog can't be just like wandering around. Animals are going to be animals, and things may happen just because they're animals. Like one time my dog got sick in a store, and that was just unavoidable. It was just, sometimes people get sick in a store. Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But the dog should not be destructive in any way. They should be well-mannered. Typically they will either lie under the table or under the person's chair, or maybe to the side of the person. And it's okay to ask. And actually, I love it when staff is thoughtful enough to say, "Hey, could I bring your dog a bowl of water?" And, I may accept or decline, but it's really nice that they thought of the dog. But again, no human food, because a working dog with an upset stomach is not a good thing. And plus, you don't want your dog. It's one thing, the way people treat their pet dogs at home, and they may allow them to beg and they may give people food to them. But my dog's out in public, and I can't have her acting in public like some people's pet dogs act at their table at dinner time.
Right. That makes sense. Mm-hmm.
So
they're there. They're there for comfort, but they're there for a job to help protect.
Yeah, they're there mainly for a job. It doesn't mean that there aren't other kinds of service dogs, but yeah, for this kind, I think it's usually pretty obvious what they're doing. And there are some people who are legally blind. They're not totally blind. They still have some vision, but they have a guide dog. And, that may be because they have some issues with depth perception or whatever. So they maybe really need them for things like stairs, or maybe their vision in the daytime is pretty good, but in the evening or in dim lighting, they are, just in a world of hurt without that dog. So, just to say.
No, that I love that. And so one of the questions that I ask you before we got on the show, and that actually I ask all of my guests, is what does a safe and inclusive food and beverage experience look like to you? From that perspective of being visually impaired, to me, safe and inclusive has similar meanings to somebody who has food allergies, but it also has different connotations. Can you answer that for the audience?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it probably does follow all the same guidelines that it would for somebody with food allergies or sensitivities. But to me, if I have a safe and inclusive food and beverage experience, it means me knowing where my food is. It means food that is not really super challenging. I don't want to feel self-conscious during my meal. Okay. I love food. As you can tell, I love food. And I want to be able to enjoy that meal as much as anybody else, and not have to be worried about how do I execute this bite to get it in my mouth without, having part of it drop on the plate, or having it be potentially, too big, or having some awkward thing happen. So, just the ability to do that. And one way that staff can help with that is to use the clock method to help a guest orient to their plate, or really to anything, meaning that anything that's right in front of me is going to be at 6:00. Anything that's kind of that would be over to my right would be, directly to my right would be at 3:00. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I was trying to think, okay, how am I going to appear on the screen? And it's like, just never mind. I'm going to do it for myself. And what would be at the far edge of my plate would be at 12:00. So, and 9 and et cetera. But, for that, and to be sure I know where my drink is. I made the mistake one time of drinking some part of someone else's adult beverage. Oh
my gosh, that's hysterical.
It was really funny, because I remember going, wow, this drink doesn't taste like I was really young. I was in college, and it was like, this drink doesn't quite taste like I really remember it tasting. And oh God, I was so embarrassed when I realized this is not my drink.
What did that person do?
She didn't say anything. That was the worst part. It's like, oh my God, I was so mortified. And it's like, oh my God, let me buy you another drink, because I'm an idiot. And oh my gosh, I just wish she would have said, excuse me, you just picked up my drink. I mean, but let us know where that we want to know where that dessert plate is out beyond our
Right.
plate. And especially like if you're sitting at round tables, sometimes I find that I don't get information about stuff like the water pitcher in the middle of the table or the condiments.
Right.
And, you just have to ask. And sometimes you're with a group of people and it's not a big deal, but sometimes you're with strangers and, and it's kind of like, okay, I already can't see. They may be staring at me while I cut my meat. So, so let me try to draw as little attention to myself as possible. And I mean, I have a big personality, so most of the time I'm okay with the attention, but most people aren't. And sometimes I'm not. So.
Right. Well, and that goes with, I think a lot of different things, even people with food allergies. I'm like, they don't want to call attention because their plate is delivered a lot of the times 10, 15 minutes later.
Right.
And so they're getting called attention to, but same thing with you. I mean, you want to be part of that same table experience without having to be quote unquote called out for having a need. Or I guess, or even a want, right? So it's how can you make that experience so universally designed so everybody it's on a level playing field. And
absolutely.
I mean, if you're the sole visually impaired individual at an event, when you put that on the registration form, somebody has asked you, do you need any assistance here? Are there questions? If you say that I'm visually impaired, or blind, what do you want those follow-up questions to be from someone, from a meeting planner, to help you have that great experience?
That's really interesting because I've always thought, sometimes we have perceptions or ideas of what something's supposed to be based on what our experience has been so far. Mm-hmm. And I would not have thought about that if you hadn't just asked me that with respect to food and beverage, because typically what that has meant for me is, okay, I need handouts in electronic format.
Okay.
Or maybe I need to, depending on what the situation is, if it's like an event I'm speaking for, maybe there needs to be some sort of arrangement for transportation to and from the airport or something. Right. But if it's an event I'm attending, then, it's an Uber thing and it's no big deal. But I never thought about it with respect to food and beverage. But yeah, it would be nice to be asked if I needed help going through a buffet line or, any kind of meal assistance. Because honestly, all I would probably need for the most part is going to be getting through the line and finding a seat.
Right. And or being communicated to, saying, hey, we are serving buffet, or this is a plated meal. I think having a planner communicate those needs, or not those needs, but that design in advance to all attendees, because whether you're visually impaired or mobility, have use a wheelchair or a walker or anything, being able to maneuver through that space is really important to understand in advance.
Yeah, for sure.
And for you, I'm thinking of an event that I attended a couple of years ago, and it was offsite, but it was on a beach. And all of the food and beverage, that would even be more difficult for you, trying. All of the food stations were, let's just say they were food trucks, basically stalls on a beach, getting to that beach, first of all, and then holding that plate level as you go through different stalls as well.
Right.
And where are all those stalls? Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now I've been doing some research and I found one company that will take a restaurant menu and convert it to Braille for customers, which is I found intriguing, is that you just can't take the menu and convert it to Braille. You have to design it in a specific way because sections and things like that, which I find completely intriguing. But when we're communicating this information to you in advance, like if we put the menu on a PDF on the event app, is that something that, how would we communicate? What's the best way to communicate to you the menu items and the design of that via website and apps? And
I think it depends. I mean, if you're going to have a menu available for everybody else ahead of time, then
right.
Sure, yeah, have it on the app. But I'm sitting here going, oh, but the app may or may not be accessible.
That's a whole nother conversation.
That's a whole other issue. Yeah, either that or, I mean, God, just send it to me in Word format,
Okay.
But if there's a limited menu at the time of the event that maybe most people don't see until the day before or whatever,
right.
Just as long as I've got somebody there on staff to say, hey, you have a choice of this, or this, I can roll with that.
We were talking before we got on here about you going to teach or, speak at a high school, and one of the kids, they had made lasagna. And I just love that story and making him feel like he has to not stand up for himself, but
to step up. Basically, there was a group of kids, and they weren't all high schoolers. This one happened to be, but there were a group of blind and visually impaired young people that I had been asked to come and speak to as an adult with vision loss, and basically to say, hey, I am a mom and I have a job, and here's how I do some of what I do. And as part of this was like a summer program that went on for a few weeks. And as part of what they'd done, they had gone to the grocery store, and so they kind of practiced shopping and budgeting, and they wound up preparing lasagna. And they asked me if I would stay for lunch. So I stayed for lunch. And there was a boy at my table, really nice looking kid, dressed pretty stylishly. And, so clearly somebody helped him pick out his clothes because he was totally blind. And he's asking, and I had known of this boy since he was very young. So, I knew that he had never had vision, but he's asking one of the, and great personality, by the way, but he's asking one of the teachers there, oh, Miss Grant, would you cut my lasagna? And I said, I'm sorry, but you're sitting at my table and that won't fly. And like I was the only person with the street cred to be able to say that because all the teachers were sighted. And I said, dude, if you ever want to date, I said, it's absolutely appropriate to say, Miss Grant, can I please have a knife? Because I'm having a hard time cutting this stuff with my fork.
Okay.
But it is not going to fly for you to say, Miss Grant, would you cut my lasagna? I said, because if you ever want to date, you're not going to be able to say, hey, sweetie, would you come cut my lasagna? So anyway.
It reminds me of that commercial where that girl sits down at the table and the guy's t-shirt is not ironed. And she's like, oh, you look extremely whatever, comfortable is what she said. Right. And it's a commercial for ring or wrinkle remover or whatever. Right. But it's like, you got to think about that in advance. And it's a little bit different for sure. Or it's very different for sure. But, saying, hey, you've got to be able to fend for yourself at the same time. And
right.
It's okay to ask for help, but you also should be able to cut your own shit. Yeah.
And I get if it's something really difficult, like if you've got a steak with a bone and you're having a hard time cutting around the bone or right. something like that. I understand that. I would have given him a little grace, but it's like, you got to practice. And I can tell you that I know that there are things now that I use a knife for that as a sighted person, I would have been able to cut with a fork because because you have that visual feedback, but because I want to be sure that I get through every layer of that lasagna, I will be using a knife.
Right.
I mean, for example.
Yes. Okay.
And I know this from personal experience when it hasn't worked. So, and I would say, as wait staff, be sure to have a few extra butter knives and steak knives and napkins on hand because we may ask for those.
Right. And I'm looking at, you've put together this great resource, which we're going to tweak a little bit, but we're going to post it with the podcast on accessibility hacks, inclusive event meals for guests for vision loss. And one of the things down at the bottom is, offer assistance respectfully. So and this is to planners and the staff. And I think we need to all understand that we can ask, if you need support, because also coming into a large, which we won't be having anytime soon, a reception area, right? How do you need assistance, or you need a buddy or a guide to guide you through that room. And your guide dog is not going to, hey, mom or Donna, the buffets are over here to the left. Mom, and the buffets are over here to the right. She's not going to know where the bar is or the buffets. So we should be okay saying, hey, how can we support you?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the other thing I think I said is, basically we can also say no and accept it if we say no. Most of the time we probably won't, but I have had people who have almost like insisted on helping me when I didn't, it was their issue. It wasn't my issue.
Okay.
And not in a meeting space, but in other spaces.
Right.
So,
and I think that just goes with life in general, is like, we shouldn't assume that somebody needs help. We should just ask the question, hey, you getting help. I mean, even able-bodied people. And there was a story I read a couple of years ago about, traveling in a wheelchair through New York City or through Venice or whatever, in the cobblestone roads. And even with your suitcase, it's hard. Right. And vision, I have my vision, I'm able-bodied, but it doesn't make it less easy with doing that.
Right.
One, gentleman, did you see the story on that guy? He was an architect and lost his vision. Chris, oh my gosh, I can't think of his last name, but yes, actually he was at a conference that I attended back like a year ago, June. Okay. The one that our mutual friend attended with me, and you weren't there and we missed you. I need to, we need to coordinate that next time.
Yeah, we totally do.
But I love the fact that he is using his experience as an architect also in the designing of the flooring for visually impaired, because it, like, changing the texture of the floors, so that, using your cane, you can actually say, hey, I'm in a different area. Right. And
absolutely.
What a simple thing to do. Right.
Right. I mean, we did that. We incorporated that in AT&T Stadium, and it was also incorporated in Globe Life Field. And I think with Globe Life Field, one of the things that we talked about, and I think this was done, is they have those big pass-through bathrooms like what you have in an airport. Okay. And people were saying, well, sometimes we get lost. And I said, okay, well, why not make one end red and another end blue, with like maybe your flooring or, some of your walls or something, so that people know, okay, I came in the red end, I need to go back out the red end. Do something with color or contrast so that people can visually see that. And I think that those of us who can't, we're going to remember which way we turned to go into the stall, because we have to.
It's kind of a necessity. And that becomes a challenge too, even with food allergies. Somebody takes the spoon and puts it in the wrong dish and things like that. But just thinking about having to put it down in its right place for the next person to utilize it as they go through the buffet makes it very, very important for somebody who's visually impaired or blind. So is there any other tips or tricks for meeting planners that you would love them to think about or know about their guests who are visually impaired?
I guess just that, don't avoid using words like see or watch. Those words are not going to bite us. One no food that I did not mention is, and I see this more with chicken than any other kind of meat, but like if you have meat that's cooked on the bone, it's like slow cooked. Sometimes that's a nightmare to eat. I'm specifically thinking about this restaurant that I love. It's a Mexican restaurant here in town, and they serve chicken mole over rice, but they give you this leg quarter and the meat's about to fall off the bone, but being able to, that's one of those meals that it's like, oh God, can I just have the shredded chicken with the mole sauce on top of the rice? It takes some of the enjoyment out of the meal, just trying to be self-conscious about it. So,
yeah, I would never really have thought about that. So I'm glad you really explain that you can be self-conscious with eating, because you're actually trying to get your hand to your mouth without physically seeing that. And it's something that we all take for granted.
Well, and sometimes it's not even getting it, like with Jell-O. Yeah, it's getting it. It's getting your hand to your mouth with the bite still intact. And with a few other things, it's like that. But with something like, like the mole situation, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, as I'm like working with my fork to try to get a piece of meat off, am I making a mess somewhere else? Am I pushing food off the edge of my plate because I've, caused this big bunch of chicken bones and meat to have moved a little bit? Am I getting sauce on my,
right.
It's too much. It's too much concentration. It's too much work. Let's just enjoy a meal.
Right. That's so true. Okay. So you and I are going to work on that cheat sheet.
Yeah, we're going to expand it.
We're going to expand it, and we'll make sure that it's uploaded to this podcast. But to end, what is your favorite food and drink to eat now, since we've been talking about?
I love spicy food. I love Indian food, which I know is very polarizing. I love Indian, and I love Mexican food and Tex-Mex. And as far as drinks, I don't know. I mean, I like water. I like teas a lot. So.
Okay. All right. So I don't know why this just popped into my head, but oh my gosh, 20 years ago, 2000, I don't know when it was, 99. Oh my gosh, 20 years ago. I was doing an event for a company, a fundraiser in LA, and Stevie Wonder was connected to that organization. And so this, shame on me. I made sure there was a piano on the stage in case he got the gumption to want to play. But I never thought about, what am I going to feed Stevie Wonder? And it may have been in the writer, and my 20 years ago brain has left me. But, making sure that he's fed.
Right. Well, and you know what?
At that event, something that I overlooked.
Well, and something that just prompted me when I was talking about drinks, it's like, something you guys need to know. If there's a way to do this discreetly, or just to ask the person, but for me, never serve me a martini in a martini glass, because they're really shallow. And the 2 times that I've had a martini in a martini glass, I've worn part of the martini. And, it's like, there's not a rule. There's nothing wrong with pouring a martini into a different kind of glass.
Right. Into a tumbler. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Give it to me in a tumbler. I don't care. Give it to me in a wine glass, but just don't give it to me in one of those little shallow funnel shaped.
I don't know how waitresses carry those anyways,
Yeah. Well, it's not like if I'm sitting at a table, it's not like it's really got to go very far to reach my mouth, but I can't, it's
not going to be
awkward.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I so appreciate what you do across the board, and I look forward to collaborating with you on so much more, because it's a new experience, and it's something that I think we all take, able-bodied people, and I think this is across the board, take for granted. And I like that you give a different perspective on what we might just find in a textbook. Here's the real life, right? Getting that glass to my mouth in a martini glass is really a little bit challenging. So,
and if I am needing that martini, that's important. That's a mission at that point. So,
right,
yeah,
exactly. Well, thank you, Donna, so much. And how can everybody find you?
They can find me. They can look for me on LinkedIn. I'm at, I think it's Donna Mack, Disability Diplomat. They can follow me on Facebook. Same thing. And my website is disabilitydiplomat.com.
Okay, fantastic. Yay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, everybody, thank you for tuning in to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your host, and I'm so glad that you are here with us today. And my esteemed guest, Donna Mack, talking about how to feed individuals who are visually impaired and blind. So I appreciate the context, and I appreciate everybody being here and participating. You can find the Eating at a Meeting podcast on all podcast platforms. You can also go to eatingatameetingpodcast.com. Oh, and hey, there is an Eating at a Meeting Facebook group. It's a free group to join, and we just talk about all things food and beverage. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.